Hello, I'm Greg Gorby from AdSpec Programming.
And my name is Devin Graham. Welcome to the first volume of our Aladdin4D video tutorial tapes.
These tapes are intended to give you a good working knowledge of the program. When we appeared on Computer Chronicles, many people called and said how helpful it was to see someone using the program.
So these tapes are actually several sessions looking over Greg's shoulder as he works with Aladdin4D. When people first use the program, the comments we receive range from good to bad.
Some say it's the most marvelous interface they've ever seen, while others ask why are we so different from all the rest. We set out to build the interface we would want to use, one that was as responsive as possible so we could concentrate on our creativity.
As you watch Greg work through these tutorials, we're sure that you'll agree that we've done just that. The tutorials presented run the gamut from simple logos to complex movements. There are tutorials on polygon creation and handling, shading, textures, and attribute lists.
There's also an excellent example of gases being used to create a sun, and an in-depth look at multiple wave sources as an insect bounces on a pool of water.
Aladdin4D is an enormously complex program. We cannot cover all of its features in a 2-volume set. After reviewing the tapes, you should be well prepared to explore the features we do not get to on your own.
And don't forget, by rewatching a segment, you may pick up something you missed the first time. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and start our look at Aladdin4D. I'm running an Amiga 4000 with 18 megs of memory. When the program opens, you're looking into a single window into 3D space. Your X, Y, and Z axes, which are color-coded, black, white, and red, are seen slowly rotating in space. I believe the best way to learn a program is to do it by using it. And so we're going to start by doing a simple example. Suppose you had a customer who wanted a logo, one of those fancy flying logos with the name of his company up. Let's assume his name's Smith. First thing we'll do here is load a font. I'm going to ask it to open a font using the Polygon Text Open Font menu item. I keep mine in an old Draw4D Pro directory called 4D Fonts. And we'll use one that comes stock with the program called Block, which is a Helvetica type. The fonts come in an F and an FF. The FF is a fillable font. The F is used for desktop publishing applications. Now that the font's loaded, let's go ahead and write the text that we want. And of course, we'll write the name of the company, Smith. You could adjust the spacing or the position. This is not quite as large as I'd like, so I'm going to select. You select by clicking on any point in the polygons in Aladdin. I'm going to select this, and this is the resize gadget. By clicking it with the left mouse button, I can freehand resize this word to any size that I want, and I think that looks pretty good right about there. If I didn't like the changes I'd made, I could hit the undo gadget here, which would change it back. Let's go ahead and resize it again. I'll make it about that size. If I like the changes, I can set it using the set gadget here. Alternately, I could have clicked with my right mouse button anywhere inside the view window. That also sets. Once you set these, the points are in a permanent position and can't be changed. Okay, I think for this example, we'll go ahead and extrude this word. This is the extrude gadget. If I were to click it with the left mouse button, it would extrude this word. I'll click it. I'm not going to set it yet. I'm going to use the 7, 8, and 9 key. I'm pressing the 7 key to rotate down a little bit to see how far we extruded. The 1 key rotates around the Z. And it looks like I've extruded it far too far. The selected polygons are shown in white. The original word is in black. It can't be seen because the white are overpainting it. This is the delete poly gadget. Clicking it with the left mouse button will delete the polygons I just extruded. I'm going to click the extrude gadget with my right mouse button, which brings up the defaults, and ask it to only extrude, instead of 10,000 on the Y, maybe 2,000 on the Y here. selecting it and extruding it again. That looks more like what I had in mind. That might be even a little bit too much. Instead of extruding it again, I'm going to select the Z-axis, and this is a flat view gadget, which will let me look straight down. I'm looking down on top of the word now. If I select this gadget with the right mouse button, it selects all polygons in the drawing. Getting my resize gadget, and I don't want to resize in this dimension, I want to resize only in this dimension, so I'm going to use this left edge as a straight edge. Hold my left mouse button down and compress these a little bit more. That looks about like what I had in mind. I think for this example I'll go ahead and select these. By the way, when you do an extrude, I'm using the 9 key to rotate back and 1 key to rotate a little bit. When you do an extrude, the faces of the polygon are grouped separately from the extruded shell. If we were to do a quick show filled on this, I'm going to get the render options up and turn on the light and the fill. And for screen mode, we'll go ahead and work with the standard ham mode here. It won't really make much difference. I'm just going to say to render this real quickly, and you can see that the shell here and the faces of the extrusion are separate. Let's go back to the editor. I'm going to use the snap to reposition these back. There is a point, a reference point, perhaps you can see it here, called an attach point in the program. I've put the attach point at the back rear of the letter M here, and selecting a corresponding point on the extruded faces. This is a snap gadget. If I selected it with the left mouse button, it would snap just the point I've selected to the attach point. This point would go to here. Right mouse button will move all of the selected polygons. So now I've put the faces back onto the word exactly where they were before. So I just wanted to illustrate that these were in two separate groups. I want them all as a single group. I'm in group level 1. I'm going to select all, and this is the group gadget. Clicking it with the left mouse button will group those. Now anytime I select the word, both the faces and the bodies will be selected. Let's go back to the flat view in the Z, looking straight down again. Select the word. This is the clone. It has defaults. Right now I'm going to just clone this word in place and select that which selected one of the clones. I'll move it back here like this, about so far. Now I want these two words, let me rotate a little bit so you can see we have two words now. I want those two words centered on the origin. I'm going to flat view again so we can see it happen. If I select this page move gadget with the left mouse button, it moves the page around. This is the page center gadget. Selecting it with the left mouse button recenters the origin to the view. If I select this gadget with the right mouse button, it puts the attach point at the origin. Now selecting all of the polygons, right mouse button on this gadget, and then selecting this gadget with the right mouse button, it will center all selected polygons to the current attach point, which happens to be at the origin since we just put it there. We now have the words centered to the origin in all dimensions. Okay, we've got our two words here. What I'm going to do now is rotate them 90 degrees around the Z-axis. Let's go ahead and change our view just a little bit so we can see this happen. Attach point, right mouse button click on the page move gadget puts the attach point at the origin. That's the point that I'm going to be rotating around. Selecting all and getting up my rotate defaults, I'm going to ask it to rotate 90 degrees around the Z. You can see now that it has rotated. If we were to look at it from the front view again, we'd be looking end on to the words. From the X, we'd be looking at them backwards. From the Z, you can see how it looks. The reason I did that is because I'm going to use a camera. I'm going to have the camera look in this direction, and I want these words to fly past the camera. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here and go ahead and set my attach point at the origin. That's because the attach point is where the first target for the camera will appear. I'm going to ask the camera to appear using only one target with the default settings. This is the camera. That's the first target. Let's zoom in and see that a little closer. And if we rotate a little bit, you can see that the camera is sitting out here just like we wanted. Let's flat view in the Z again and select both words. Now, in order to select the one, I select with the left mouse button. If I then try to select the second one, I can't unless I hold down the Shift key, and then I can select it too. I want to move these straight down, so I'm going to use this border as a straight edge. Hold down my Alt key and pull them back. Now I want, when it first starts, the camera not to be able to see the words, so I'm going to set them right about there. Okay, let's use our page move gadget to move up a little bit. and see what we've got here so far. The camera is looking in this direction at the target. The words are behind the camera, so they won't be visible in the first part of the animation. I want the words to move to the origin here. So I'm going to draw a line which will be a path. If I select this word, hold down the shift and select this, and use a right mouse button on the page move gadget. If you recall, when no polygons were selected, it put the attach point at the origin. When polygons are selected, it puts the attach point at the center of the selected polys. Here it is right here. The reason I did that is because I want my path to start from the center here and move to the origin. So now I'm going to use my freehand tool with a left mouse button click and use this as a straight edge and draw a straight line up here. I won't be able to see it when it hits the Y there, so I'm going to move it off slightly. Now, using my snap tool will allow me to put this point of this path at the origin. A right mouse button click here puts the attach point at the origin. Selecting this end of the polygon and a left mouse button on the snap now puts the path, the polygon that's going to be a path, which has only two points in it, running from the center of the words to the origin. I'll select this line now and tell the program to make the polygon a path. Now I want to move along the path, so I'm going to turn on the movement. I also want this to rotate. I want it to rotate around the y-axis with an entry of 180 degrees, and then I want that to happen all the way through the animation, but stop when it's about 8/10 of the way done. And I think I'll also have it rotate on the Z so that the word turns and faces us. We'll have it, since we rotated 90, we'll go -90 here, which will turn it and face us. And let's have that not start until the animation's about halfway done and finish up when it's about 80% finished. We now have the path parameters established. We'll select the two words here and tell them that during the animation, this is called assign a path, it should look at this path. We're all ready to look here. Let's rotate a little bit and see what we've got here. Again, now this is the path. The words are assigned to the path. They're going to move in this direction as we drew the path, and when the animation is about, as it starts, they'll be rotating around the Y. They'll actually start inverted because we specified a 180 degree beginning point and a 0 end on the Y rotation. So they'll start upside down, rotate, and about halfway into the rotation, they'll begin to rotate around the Z to face the camera. Now I can ask to preview this animation here. Accuracy is something that should always be on when you're using rotations. And let's assume that we want about 180 frames here, which would be, there are 30 frames a second on videotape, so 18 divided by 3, this will be about a 6-second animation. And we ask it to begin the preview. The program will go ahead and show us what type of motion we've asked for. You can see that the word is moving past the camera just as we asked. This object in the center is the target the camera is looking at. As the word comes by the camera, it has been rotating, and it's starting its rotation on the Z now. And we've got it a little too close to the camera, so we'll back off some since the M came right through the camera, and I'd like to see the entire word go past the camera before it starts. So let's go back to the editor. I'm using my escape key to go back to the editor, and we'll adjust the position. It'll be easier to do here if I go ahead and flat view in the Z. I'm going to move the view up a little since I'll be moving the words down. I'll select both words. Using this as a this left border as a straight edge, holding down my Alt key, I'll pull them down like so. I'm going to then go ahead and select both of these words again, using my right mouse button here, set the attach point to the center of those words, and using the snap tool, move the end of the path to the center again. The camera, I'll go ahead and back off to about here once again. We can take a quick look at this again. When I use the F9 key to enter the preview mode. When we're running the preview mode, we can use the Q key to only paint part of the polygons to be able to see the motion more rapidly. And I see that I'm still not quite back far enough. I'll let this render down again until the word's just about ready to rotate, and turn quick move back off so that we can see just what we're seeing. And again, we're in the M, so we haven't gone back far enough. Let's go ahead and do that again. We'll take these words and move them back one more time. Select them both, set the attach point to the center, select this, and snap it to it. I'll go ahead and then move my camera back like so. and we'll take a look again. Using the F9 key to enter the preview, quick move to go ahead and enter quick move, and at the point they're starting to turn here, I'm going ahead and we can see that we're back into the S now, so we're almost where we want to be. Actually, this doesn't look too bad, except for the fact that the S is going to run right through the camera. So we'll go ahead and we'll move them back just a little bit more. Let's zoom out. Select these two and pull them down a little bit here. Go ahead and select the two again, attach point at the center of the words, select the end point on the path, snap it down, and grab the camera and move it back down. I think this time we'll probably be just about where we want to be. Using the F9, I'm back into the preview mode, and we're rotating around. It's looking pretty good. I think a customer will be pretty happy with this. And yeah, there's the S key, or the S right in front of us, very large at that point. We could even go back a little bit further, but I think this has a dramatic impact this way. So we'll go ahead and get out of this, and we'll think about texturing and so on this word. Before we look at the texturing, I'm not quite satisfied with what's going on. I think it's just a little bland. The word rotates very nicely, flies by the camera very nicely, but we could have a little bit more activity going on. Perhaps if we had some sort of a platform, a rectangular solid that spun its way in from this side and came in and slid under the word during the animation, that might be nice. This will get a little complex because we'll be using hierarchical paths, but it's not too bad, so let's go ahead and try it. First thing I'll do is use the tools Make Rectangle menu item, and I'll go ahead and I'll make a rectangular cube sitting at the origin, just like this. I'm going to flat view in the Y and the X here so I can get a dimension on this word, just about how long it is. I'm going to go ahead and select both words and set the attach point at the center of them, and select the cube, and using my right mouse button on the center gadget, center it to that attach point. I'm going to then select this and resize it freehand so that it's about the same length as the word and relatively thin. Now if I go ahead and grab it and move it down below the word like so, I'll have it in these two dimensions. Looking down from the Z-axis, I can see that it's quite a bit larger than I want. I'm using the resize tool and the bottom as a straight edge to resize it so that it just about fits underneath the words. If we zoom in on it a little bit here, you'll be able to see a little bit better what I've done here, and I'll be able to tell a little bit more what size I want it. I want it about that size. Now, when the animation starts, if I wanted to select this point right here, by the way, this word is in front of it. So I'm going to just hide that word. This is the hide gadget. This is the show gadget. Clicking the show will make the word visible again. Hiding it, and I don't have to worry about it. I'm going to select this object and move it off here to the left. Now, that object has actually left our field of view, but it's no problem. I can continue to move it using the bottom as a straight edge so that it's in a straight line. You can see where I've put it. I'll show all again here so that we can get the word back up. And I'm going to select this object and put the attach point at its center, grab the freehand tool and use the bottom as a straight edge to draw a line straight into space here to right about the center of that, the original path, the second path here, or the first path that I'm going to do. This will be the path that the block follows. So let's select it, say Make Polypath, turn on the movement, and during the animation, the x-axis runs this direction. So I'm going to have it rotate around the x-axis. So, I'm sorry, that's the y-axis that I want it to rotate, going down this way. And I want the object to spin that direction, so we'll have it rotate about twice, which is 720 degrees. And we'll have it go ahead and do that rotation starting about halfway into the animation, and finishing up at the same time we have the other ones finishing up. The reason I'm having them finish up before the end of the animation is I'm going to use a moving background, which I want to continue to move slightly after the objects have stopped moving. So again, we have the path moving, we have two rotations around the y-axis, which begin halfway through the animation and end 80% of the way through the animation. We'll accept that, and this object here then we will assign to that path. The last thing we have to do is assign this path to the original path. Let's rotate it a little bit so you can see where they are. I'll select this path and say assign a path and select the second path. During the preview we'll be able to see the two work together. I'm going to go ahead this time and preview the animation with the save on, and that way we'll be able to show you this in real time and how we look at a preview animation. I'll pause the tape while it's finishing and be right back. The preview is finished saving the animation. It took about a half a minute. We'll go back to the workbench here. I use directory Opus. I stored the animation in RAM. I'm selecting it. I have a utility that's public domain called display in my C directory. I'm saying display the animation. It's now going to go ahead and play it by hitting the F2 key using this utility. It'll run at the full 30 frames a second, and I can get a good sense of the amount of time that's going to take and the appearance of the animation. It looks real good to me. I'm going to go ahead and settle for this. Let's go back to the program. We'll quit directory Opus here and go back to the program. Now I want to think about textures on these objects. Let's assume that this is a wood company and we're going to make his flying logo out of wood to represent his product. So what I want to do is I want to think of these two words in this platform being cut out of the same block of wood. I'm going to select this point, make it the attach point, and select the object and center it to it. Now I'm going to select both of the words and this object, and that'll become obvious why I'm doing that in a minute. The textures menu item will open up the texture list window. There are no lists available right now. We'll add one. Going to the control, and we open up another where we can load or save texture lists that we like and control the number of cycles and so on about the list. We're going to use a bitmap list right now. I have none loaded, so I'm going to go ahead and go to where I keep my bitmaps. I keep them in a drawer called Aladdin4D Textures, and the one I want to use is an oak texture. It's a 24-bit texture, which is loading now. After it's loaded, you'll see it appear here. We'll select it and say Accept. We want to select the suggested anytime we change our textures. This will put in default values for the texture. We're going to ask it to be full color and full strength. The entry is the first part of the timeline the texture is active. This one's active over the entire length of the animation from frame 1 to frame 181 since we have 180 frames, or from 0 to 1 in time. We're going to go ahead and hit the match gadget, which will make sure that it doesn't change over time. We have it set right now for normal. There are several types available. Normal is what we want. And I want to use a free angle type, about 30 degrees rotated around the X and about -30 on the Z. That'll look like it was cut out of a piece of wood at a slight angle and look very nice for the wood grain. We'll accept this, and the program will go ahead and apply the texture to the words now. Okay, we're ready to take a look at our first render, except for one thing. I'd like to have a background. I'm going to select background here and add one. Under control, I'm going to rename it background so I can tell it apart from the other list. Member control and select. I'm going to go ahead and use the same bitmap for the background. Suggest it again, which will give us our first and last X and Y indices. And since we're going to move it this time, well, first it's a background, so let's go full strength, or full color, but on the strength, let's make it fairly dark so it doesn't compete with the other objects in the drawing. The X entry, the entry here is what occurs at the beginning of this attribute, or this texture list. If we click this, the exit side becomes active, and this is what occurs at the end of the texture list time. So for the entry, we're going to ask it to have a first X index of 0 and a last X index of, let's say, 0.8. That's 80% across the bitmap. For the first X on the exit side, we're going to use 20% and 1. In other words, that bitmap is going to slide to the left. We'll do the same thing on the Y, using the same values here. And during the animation, it will also slide up the screen. This will create a diagonal movement in our background. We have their strength set the same and our color level set the same so that the background won't fade out during the animation. We'll go ahead and accept this, and our background's in place. Now we're going to say render options here and make sure our light and our fill, our textures, and our background are on. And that's all we'll need to do there. One more thing that needs to be done is to set an attribute list. All of these polygons could share the same attribute lists here. We'll say attributes. There are none, so we'll add a list. And under the member control here, we're going to ask the polygon to be completely white. This is a good idea if you're not using foam shading, because it allows the textures to be their full color, and we'll accept that. Now it occurs to me that at the end of the animation, this word is going to be behind this word, so I'm going to select it and say Attributes and clone the original one, because I don't want it to compete with the word that's in front. So on its reflectivity level, I'm going to slide it down a little bit. Now, come to think of it, I'll just do that at the end. That means that during time, that word is going to fade down to in value, so that by the time it reaches the end of the animation, it'll be slightly darker than the other word, which will look very nice. Okay, we're ready to do some test renders here. So let's set our render options, our screen mode. I have an Opal Vision installed in this machine. We'll use it for our tests. And we might as well go ahead and use the full 736 by 472 that the Opal Vision is capable of. And we'll render our view. You'll notice that the background here is in place. It is an oak grain texture that we specified. In the first frame we have no polygons visible. So I'll go ahead and hit the escape key to stop this. That's a very nice value on the background, but we won't know for sure until we see the polygons come into play. I'm going to ask it to redraw a frame where the polygons have come in, maybe frame 60. You'll notice that the words are, of course, appearing. And if the background were, if it were more obvious, you would notice that the background were sliding. Okay, that looks pretty good, except for the fact that the light coming from the bottom is not there at all. We're using just the default global lights for this animation, so I'm going to stop the image rendering here and ask for the light requester. And this requester allows us to control two global lights plus ambient light. This left light, which is coming from the left and front, I'm going to put slightly below. It was above. This one I'm going to allow to stay where it is in its default. The strengths here at 1.0, 0.5, and 1.1 are fine. If we redraw this frame, you'll see that the light is now coming in from the bottom, not quite as dark as it could be, or not quite as bright as the right light. This looks pretty good, except for I'm noticing here, I'll go ahead and stop it. I'm noticing here that I'm able to see the individual pixel information. So I'm going to return to the editor here. With nothing selected, I can ask for my texture list to come back up. This is the one that's on the words. And ask for it to turn on the anti-aliasing. If you have anything selected, you should never add a list or delete a member from a list. We'll go ahead and render again. I'm going to hit the escape gadget right away because we want to redraw the same frame that we saw a minute ago so that you can see the difference here in the anti-aliasing. One difference you'll notice is, of course, it takes a little longer to render because of the averaging going on. The other thing that you'll notice is all of the pixel information is now gone, resulting in a smooth wood grain appearance on the letters themselves. Okay, I like what I see. I think I'll go ahead and render this one, and we'll go ahead and put the finished animation on tape. One last thing before we do that, I forgot to return this solid to its end on the path. So we'll go ahead and put the attach point down here, select the solid, and center it up to that point. Now we're ready to go. We'll show you the animation as soon as it's rendered. An important feature in Aladdin4D is its ability to use texture lists as backgrounds and foregrounds and overlays. This allows you to do rotoscoping effects. We'll illustrate this quickly. I'm going to stop rotation here because I'm going to multitask with Aladdin. Aladdin, of course, is still running back there. We're going to go ahead and run dpaint 4 so that I can show you a bitmap I've prepared here. We'll ask to load the picture and go to where I've got it stored in Aladdin's textures drawer. It's called Roto 2. It's a 16 color 640 by 400, and as you can see, I'll turn off the menus and so on. It's just a simple black top with a white bottom down here. I'm going to use this as a foreground landscape. Actually, it'll be a second layer in a bitmap texture, in a background texture list. Let's go ahead and quit. Let's load a second picture that we're going to use. We're going to put a snowstorm in front of it. I've got one here called trails.pick. It looks very much just like a bunch of streaks, but if I use the magnify tool and come in here, you'll see that they are 16 separate little pixels, each one with a different shade of gray going from white to black. They cover the screen. Okay, let's quit here. I want to show you one more bitmap that I'm going to be used. It's a 24-bit bitmap, so I'll use Opal Vision to take a look at it. And again, it's in the textures drawer for Aladdin. It's called Roto 1. What it is a 24-bit, because I needed a very gradual change from a dark gray to a light gray at the horizon. Obviously another black on white sort of background or landscape image. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to Aladdin and see what we can do with this background. We're going to add a list, go to our member control, and go ahead and load the bitmaps. I'll go to our Aladdin textures drawer and go down to the rotos. We'll grab roto 1.pick, which is the 24-bit with the graduated gray sky. And we'll also load roto 2.pick, which is the 16 color we're going to use for foreground. And we'll go ahead and we'll load the one called trails, which we're going to use for a snow image. Now for the first one in the background, I want to use the 24-bit. We'll say suggested here and go ahead and use full color. And I'm going to leave this at 0.8 because I want to use a little bit of the background or the palette color for color 0 to blend in with that. We'll say match on that. Now, as you know, we're going on the entry side across the entire from 0 to 1 on the X pixels, which will cover the entire bitmap. Instead of doing that, I want it to move very gradually. So I'm going to go from 0 to 0.9, which is 90% of the bitmap, and on the exit values, I'll go from 1 to 1.1 to 1.0, which is also 90%. This will cause the bitmap to slide. Okay, and we're ready with that one. Let's go ahead and add a second level here. What it does when you click add is it copies the last level in the list for you. So we'll say select, and we'll choose roto 2.pick. This time we want to go ahead and use it as a transparency, and they went right by it. An opacity map, and we don't want it very strong, so let's set it at about, that'll be fine, about 25% strength here. And what we want to do on this one is make it slide a little bit faster. So we use 80% of the bitmap on each end, so that's 0 to 0.8, and on the other end 2 to 1, 0.2 to 1. The Y's will go ahead and use 0 to 1 on both, so that the Y's stay the same. We'll accept that, and our background should be in place. Let's take a quick look at it here. I'll turn on the fill mode. It has to be on for the background to be visible. And for setting screen mode, we'll go ahead and just ask for an Opal 320 by 200 for some quick previews here and render it. And as you can see, our background is in place, the 24-bit file, and down below is our secondary. Now during time, this background here, this first layer, will move slightly this way, and this layer will move a little bit more rapidly this direction. This is called rotoscoping. It's typical for some 2D type animation packages, fairly unusual in a 3D package, and has a great deal of power. Let's work on the snowstorm. We'll use an overlay for that. We'll add a list, and we'll go ahead and name it overlay so I can tell it apart. Under member control, we'll go ahead and select the trails.pick. And we want to use a normal for this, at full color. Of course, it's just a grayscale. Anyhow, we're going to ask for a very low strength, maybe 15% or so. And that was a pretty accurate hit, but we'll change it to 15%. We'll say match on those, and we also want to go suggested to change this column into the suggested. Now, the snow has to go by very quickly, and those little trails, if you remember right, were very short, only 16 pixels wide. So I'm going to ask to go on the first level here about 10% of the bitmap. So we're going from 0 to 10%. On the end here, we'll ask it to go from 9 to 1. Obviously, this is 10% on the left. This is 10% on the right. During time, it will slide that 10% across the bitmap. The Ys, we'll go ahead and leave it full scale. And now we want to use a couple more levels of this to increase the depth of the snowstorm. So we'll add one. It's copied the previous one. I want to leave everything the same, except this time, let's only use 5%. This snow will move across. I better make sure that that's 5 and not 50. This snow will move across exactly twice as fast as the first level, and the streaks, the trails, will be twice as long. Let's add a third level here, and this time we'll do it again. This time we'll go ahead and use only 2.5% of the bitmap on each end, so that'd be 975 here to 1. This is a fairly important concept and very simple, even though it may appear complex at first. We'll accept this. We now have 3 levels. If we go down our third level here, which is the top level actually, is 2.5%. We'll have fairly long trails moving rapidly. This one, using 5% of the bitmap for each frame, has moderately long trails moving fairly rapidly, and the slowest moving trails and the smallest trails. Let's go ahead and turn on our overlay options, overlay on our render options, and render this. And you'll be able to see that this will be our snowstorm. These will move by very rapidly. I could go ahead and turn on an anti-aliasing effect for this, which would smooth out those grays. And as you can see some of the pixel information on these extended ones. You can see the intermediate shades of gray changing here. We could have used a 24-bit map to get a better shading gradation across there, and used maybe even instead of a 640 wide gone 1280, and used 32 colors of gray across here. The anti-aliasing, if I did use, would probably increase our rendering time by double, since there are 5 bitmaps being composited here in this image. Okay, we've got everything all set up here. I'm going to go ahead and ask for a 3D object to lay in between. Now we have the snow, which is laying on top. We have the back mountain ranges. All of these 5 layers are moving from right to left, causing a sensation of a snowstorm, and they're all moving at different rates of speed. This is carrying rotoscoping to the max. Let's go back to the editor here and create some kind of an object. How about a crane? That'll give us an opportunity to use the attribute list line types. So let's go ahead and make a rectangle, and let's lay it flat in the XY plane. 10,000 units will be fine. By the way, the measurement system in Aladdin is in units only. You can do conversions if you need to into real-world coordinates. The distance from the origin to the end of the axis is 10,000 units. So as you can see, at 10,000 units centered to the origin occupies this area here. We're going to use our extrude on this object. Let's set our attach point to the center of the object, and we're going to ask for our extrude defaults, and we'll extrude up the screen, which is negative in Aladdin, about 20,000 units, and we want to go ahead and decrease each dimension by down to 10% of its original size. We'll ask for 20 segments and not worry about any power reduction on the extrude. We'll extrude this, and what we have here is our extrusion. If I rotate this, you can see fairly clearly what's occurred. Let's go ahead and stop it. This is the shape that I want, but not nearly long enough, so I'm going to grab everything and group it, and then select all again. Use the resize gadget to stretch it out considerably taller. Excuse me, this is going to be our crane arm here, and now what I want to do is I want to hang something from the top of it. Let's use this opportunity to take a look at the space controls. I want to create some kind of a suspension cord that'll hang down here, and then a weight to hang. During the animation, I'll tilt this crane away from us in space, and then have it rotate in this direction. and have the suspended weight hanging from the end of the crane. Let's create a new space here. This is the space control with a right mouse button click here. I open the change space requester and I can say create, and that'll create a new space here. This space is empty. I'm going to flat view in it. If I go back, you can see we're in space 2. If I go back to space 1, we have the crane still sitting there. I'm going to record the view here from this space and then jump to space 2 and ask to restore the view. That way I know I've got the same view that I'm looking at here and I can judge my sizes relatively easily. Okay, instead of making some kind of a complex chord, we're never going to be very close to this, so I'm going to use a simple little box here. I'm going to go ahead and ask for an extrusion this time, and only about 6 segments, just like we did for the other one. And instead of 10% here, we'll go ahead and keep it square. Let's accept that and extrude this. And so we have what we have here is a box that has 6 sides on each of its vertical sides, and yet the top and the bottom are just regular rectangles. Okay, that's what we'll use for our suspension. We're going to go ahead and grab everything and group it, and then select it and resize it. I can remember about how high the crane was, and that looks about good. From the Z then, we'll go ahead and select this object, and holding down my Alt key while I'm dragging will resize in the 2 dimensions that we're seeing. Let me zoom in on it a little bit more and center up the screen, and we'll select it and resize it down to about there. Since we're never getting very close to this object, it'll appear rope-like during the animation. Okay, for the weight, I'm going to use a sweep of some sort. Let's move this object off to the side here a little bit and set the attach point at the origin, which is where the freehand tool will begin to draw. And I want to be able to see the rope while I'm working so I can get a good judge of size. I'm going to get the freehand tool. I'm going to just begin to draw, perhaps about that long. Now, when you're using the freehand tool, tapping the tab key deposits additional points. So I'm tapping the tab key and dragging out the new point that was made, tapping as I go. Wherever I feel like I want the curve to be smooth and in its transition, I'll add another point. That looks pretty good. Let's zoom in on it. Now, I'm going to sweep this around the Z-axis to make a sort of a pear shape here. So this point, or this point, is the one I want to sweep around. If I sweep around this one, I'm going to turn on the manual mode here so we can see the coordinates when I select that point. As you can see, it has an X of 0. This point up here I want to be exactly the same. Right now it's at 320. So I'm going to make this a 0 and click the move point and set. So I'm done with that. Now, with the attach point here and the Z-axis selected, I'll get my sweep defaults open and ask for perhaps 16 segments on the sweep. That's 16, not 162. Now, very important here is this connect last. If you're making a donut type shape with an opening in the center, you want to leave the connect last on. Otherwise, this segment, which is the last segment in the polygon, will not be used in the sweep. If you're making a solid like an apple or an orange or a pear, you absolutely want to turn this off. Otherwise, it'll make a column of single polygons in the middle. That's 2 pointed polygons. They can be very dangerous for shading and texturing and so on, causing all kinds of grief. So we turn off the connect last since this is going to be a solid object, and we accept and click our sweep. This original template poly is sitting here. We could, if we wanted to, get rid of it. Let's show you the sweep here. We could go ahead and store this in a space if we wanted to use it later. We don't need it, so we'll delete it. Okay, I'm going to look down from the Z here and back off a little bit and get a feel for the size of this. I think it's a little large in this dimension, so I'm going to hold down my Alt key to shrink just those 2 dimensions equally. Looking back from the Y, that'll be our weight. I'm going to center this to the origin. This is my attach point with a right mouse button click here with no polygon selected, centered my attach point to the origin. And then I'm going to select this object, and a right mouse button here will center it to that point. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. Attach point to the origin, select this object, and center it. Now these 2 objects are centered to each other, and I'm going to then go ahead and grab this, and using this as a straight edge so that I only move it along this 1 dimension, move it up like so. Okay, and I like everything pretty well. I'm going to go to group level 2, select all and group everything so I can handle it easily. Selecting it, opening my space change requester, and saying down so that space 1 is the one that's illustrated. I can say move selected and they will jump back to space 1. If we go back to space 1, there they are. I'll hide those right now because I want to move them up, and they'll be difficult to select with the crane in the way. Alternatively, I could say move to first. That way, when I select here, it will select those instead of the crane, and I won't have to worry about hiding anything. I'm going to move it up to about here, and we're in good shape. Now all we have to worry about is our animation, so let's zoom in a little bit. You know, when I make this structural, it might look nicer if it were all triangles, so we'll do that. That is now turned into all triangles. If I rotate it a little bit, you'll be able to see. Okay, so we're going to flat view here. We're going to hold down the Control and the Shift key. Now the Shift says to select more than one polygon, allow that. And the Control says ignore any groups, so it's only going to select this one polygon on the bottom here, as you can see. I'm setting my attach point to the center of that, and I'm going to draw a triangle starting there. This is going to be the path that controls the crane. I noticed, by the way, that the crane and the end caps are not grouped, so I'm going to group those right now so I don't forget. So turning this into a path, we're going to ask it to rotate away from us as positive, so we'll say we'll start at about 30 degrees on the X and end at about 60. That will cause the crane to start rotated away from us 30 degrees, and during the animation rotate even further away from us down to 60 degrees. Now on the Z, I'm going to be putting a camera slightly to the right of the object here, so I'm going to want the crane to start rotated around this direction in the Z, and during the animation come in this direction. So we're going to ask to go about minus 30 here, or 40. Let's go ahead and go 40, up to 40 degrees. That'll cause an 80-degree arc to be inscribed by the end of the crane in space in this direction. And we don't need to worry about movement or anything, so we'll accept that right now. We want to select the crane and tell it that during the animation it should look at this path. Now the weight and the suspension cord here we also want to have moving. I'm going to hold down the Control and the Shift again and select just this point as I did before. And using a right mouse button click here, put an attach point at the center of that polygon. And draw a polygon or a triangle out from there, which will be the path of the control. We'll say make poly a path. And if you recall, here we use 30 and 60 on the main crane. This path will be hierarchically linked, and we want to eliminate that influence. So we're going to say minus 30 to minus 60 here, which will mean that that vertical column will always stay vertical. Now we're in good shape. We want to assign these objects to this triangle. And we could even put another path here and assign this and have it sway slightly in the wind as it follows and so on. But right now we'll just use the two. Now we want to make sure that this path during the animation looks at this path for its instructions. And as a last thing, we want to add our camera. We'll go ahead and do so. The camera itself, I want to be out in space, perhaps about here. And the target that it's going to be looking at, we can bring down to about here. Let's look down from the top and see just how they're lined up. Okay, I think we better back them off a little bit. As I mentioned, this crane, this tip of this crane is going to be out here in space, and so we'll probably want the camera to be looking in about this direction right here. We can use the preview to find out just what it's going to look like. I'm using the F9 key, and looks like we're doing pretty well, except I've got it moving away from me, which is not what I wanted. The X rotation is fine, but the Z is wrong, and the camera needs to be looking down just slightly. So we can make the camera look down a little bit by moving the target down just slightly, like so. And we can then go ahead and alter this path again and change that from negative 40 to 40 and 40 to negative 40, which will change the rotation on the Z. Let's use our preview again to see what's happened. And yeah, that's very much the effect that I had in mind. Now keep in mind that this object will be in the snowstorm as it moves. So let's go back here and think about shading. I'll go to another group level where this is grouped separately and ask to shade it, and we'll go ahead and use Phong shading. Now this assign adjacent is very important. If we were going to shade an object that had right angles in it like this, we would want to make sure that this was off. Otherwise the program will interpolate across this junction, making it look smooth instead of square. This object, this pear shape, we don't need to worry about that. We do want the assign adjacent on for everything in it. We'll go ahead and accept that. The program shades the object, and let's go ahead and texture it while we're at it. I'm going to add a list, Control, we'll call it weight so we can tell it apart. And we better spell it correctly. And then member control, we'll select, we'll go ahead and show the bitmaps. We could use one of these, but we'll go ahead and load a new one. Perhaps, let's see what we have here. And we don't want to, we'll use this rock texture. It'll look quite nice on there. Okay, so we've got that selected. We'll go ahead and use a free angle projection on it so that it looks like it's sculpted, and use this almost magical 30 and minus 30. We can use full color and only partial strength, which will allow some of the color from the base to come out. And we're in good shape on that. We'll accept it. Of course, when I hit suggested, it went ahead and set this up for the new texture type. Anytime you choose either procedurals or bitmaps, always hit the suggested first, then modify from there. So we'll accept that. The program will map the object. And the only thing we have left to do now is attribute lists. Let's go back to group level, I think it was 2, where I had everything working together. And we'll say, well, as a matter of fact, let's use group level 3 because we want to give this a separate attribute list. On attribute lists, we'll add, control, and we better name it so that we can tell it apart. And under member control, this is a snowstorm. I'm going to have everything shades of gray and blue, except for perhaps this weight. Let's keep it rather warm compared to the rest. And about like so, we can have it a not such a brightly reflecting object, and we can accept that. And let's go ahead and hide this to get it out of our way for a moment and select this suspension. When I select it here, only the end cap selected, notice that. So I want the entire thing selected. I'm holding down my shift, selecting it and grouping it here. Now selecting it, I can say attributes, and we'll add one. And this time we'll make it a sort of a bluish color and rather dark, about like so. And we'll say match on that and accept it. There's no shading on the object, so it won't really matter if it's hard or not. And we'll accept that. And the crane is the last object for its attributes. And I better go ahead and make sure that this is grouped in both, and it wasn't. So for its attributes, we'll go ahead and select this, which was the suspension, clone it, and under control, the only thing we want to do, we'll make it the same color, but this time we'll go to an edges type. And the 500 units here means that any point on that polygon that's within 500 units of the edge of the polygon will paint. Anything farther than that will not paint. 500 units ought to work out very nicely for this form, so we'll accept that. And I believe we're all ready to go. Let's show all and go ahead and do a little test render on this scene. Of course, our snowstorm and our backgrounds are in place, and you can see the effect of the attribute list. Now this is only a 320 by 200 render, so it's rather coarse, but we can at least see our color and our placement and so on. And the one thing I've noticed here is that I have no texture on the ball. So let's go ahead and turn on the texture. And render options, we can go ahead and turn on textures and foam. And if I render again, we'll see the texture appear here on the ball. Of course, no changes occurring in the top screen, so we won't see anything until it hits that area, which ought to be about now. There it is. And that looks rather nice. The animation ought to come off real well. The form of the crane isn't really obvious in a single frame like this. With more resolution, it will be, of course. And as it turns, the light will play against the back and the front, and its form will be very nicely laid out. So I think this is good. We'll go ahead and save out the animation, and we'll show it to you as soon as it's done. I'm working in D-Paint, finishing up a happy little crab here. Aladdin has the ability to allow you to trace bitmaps, which we're going to illustrate with a child's mobile. On the jump page in D-Paint here, I've got a happy little fish Happy little crab. After drawing or digitizing your images, cut them out as a brush. Go to about the maximum size of the object, like so. When you've got the brush cut, go ahead and save it, and we'll say brush save, and we'll go here to, well, this is a good place right here, and we'll save it out as crab.pic. Let's jump to our other screen here with the fish on it and grab the fish as a brush. You can use full screens, of course. The brush just keeps the data size down a little bit. It's a little easier to work with. And we'll save out the fish as fish.pic. Okay, I'm finished here in D-Paint. Those are the two images we'll use. So we'll quit here. Back in Aladdin, what we'll do is ask to go into trace mode. We'll go to the place where we've stored those, which I have in an area called drawing tape, and we'll grab the crab. The program will load it and convert it to an image which can be loaded into the editor. We now want to trace this image. It's as you can see the axes here right in front of the image, superimposed. So we want to make sure not to change our view position while we're tracing. You start by dragging a line out to some point on the image that you want to go to. As soon as you're dragging, Aladdin automatically goes into a double magnify mode. Delete the original poly then. Its purpose was just to get the attach point up here in space at a point that corresponds to the image that's laying in the editor. Now you begin to trace this, dragging out a line, dropping down a point. You can be as accurate as you want on this. For a child's mobile, we don't need to be very accurate at all. For something like a company logo, you'd want to take considerable time and care making it as accurate as possible. When you can let go of your left mouse button at any time, and then press and re-enter the magnify mode to continue your trace. This takes a few minutes, but it's quite a nice way of handling and gives you complete control over the number of points and the accuracy you want in your polygon that represents this little crab or whatever you're working on. As I said, you can let go at any time and take a look at your progress, and then go ahead and continue to add points using the tab key to add my points, like so. Okay, I've finished outlining the crab. When you're finished with that, you can go ahead and say trace mode, and that'll toggle the bitmap back out of the editor. The polygon that represents the crab here is very complex, of course. Normally you wouldn't use something this complex unless it's going to be something that's not too time sensitive. It takes more time to render something like this than it does if we were to face it. If we wanted to face it, let me give you a quick illustration. I'll hide the crab here. And, well, no, we'll go ahead and work with him. If I were to want to face this polygon, I would say here, face, begin. At that point, the program now would have hidden any other polygons that are present, and we can go ahead and just begin to click points like so. And let's say we wanted a triangle here, then you just go ahead and use the polygon menu item, face, add, or the F key. At that point, a triangle would appear there. We can go ahead and select more points. They can be more than that. More than 3 points like this little rectangle, and I hit face again, and so on. But we're not going to face this for this illustration. It's not necessary. If we were going to deform him under a deform level, we would have to. So I've gone ahead, I'm going to hide the crab polygon and get rid of these two polygons that I created here to illustrate facing. So let's show the crab again. We'll select him and use the default extrude of 10,000 on the Y at 100% and extrude him. Now what we have here is our little crab in space, copied from the bitmap. Now the unique thing about being able to trace a bitmap like this is we know that when we project that bitmap on this polygon, it's going to fit exactly. Let's go ahead and put it on these two edges, or the two faces of the extrude here. And we'll say textures, we'll add a list, and we'll go ahead and select, we'll load that bitmap. We go to work, Aladdin, drawings, tape, and he's the crab. and we'll go ahead and accept it. Use suggested, and since we're looking straight down the y-axis, we'll use normal projection on the y, just like so. We'll use match so that his strength and his color don't change over time, and accept that. And the program will map it. If we were to ask to render this now using our textures and so on, let's go ahead and use Opal for our test renders here. You'll see that the little crab is sitting right where we expected him to be mapped onto the object. Let's go back and look from a little different angle here so you can see that a little clearer. This is a very useful feature. And there he sits. Now I'm not too pleased with the information along the polygon edges here, of course, so we're going to go ahead and shade this. And this will give us an opportunity to look at shading groups, which polygons should be shaded across and which ones shouldn't. So I'm going to select the caps, which we don't need to worry about, and hide those. And I'm going to flat view in the Y here so I can see clearly. I'm going to isometric mode. Now isometric mode goes into a parallel projection. As you can see, if we rotate the view, all edges that are parallel in space are parallel here on the screen. So I'm going to flat view, and this is completely grouped. I'm going to hold down my Control and my Shift and begin to select. Now, an angle like this I don't want to be shaded across, and yet these angles here I do want shaded. This one I don't. So what I'm going to do is, holding down the Control and the Shift, select these here, and go ahead and select some that I also want shaded that aren't apart, that aren't touching this. I can go ahead and get a hold of this side over here, like so, and perhaps around his eye here. The point is, I'm just going ahead and I'm grabbing areas that I do want to shade across, but don't touch each other at this point. So I want those two to shade together, I want these three to shade together. These I do, but of course they're touching here, so I don't do those right now. These two I want to shade together, these two, these three here will shade together, these two over here. You would do the same thing for fonts if you were working on something that you wanted a very nice font that was shaded properly. There I've accidentally grabbed that by mistake. I'm going to group these now, and grab those two and group them separately. That way my original grouping information is still intact here. So that'll be one group. Let's hide those, and let's work on another group. Let's do these three here, and these three here will be fine, and these two, and let's go ahead and do him across here, and grab those two, and get the outside of this leg, and this leg here, and the back of this leg, perhaps this leg now, and this is not touching, so we'll use these, and we'll go ahead and use these two here, and we'll group those. And I'm pretty well satisfied with this. We'll let this be the group, the groups that we'll use. Let's show all. I'm going to rotate a little bit so we can see what we're selecting here. I'm going to hide the original faces. Select this first shading group that I had and say shading. We'll use Fong with its sign adjacents on. And we'll hide those. We'll select this shading group that we picked out and say shading and use Fong and hide those. And on the rest of them we'll go ahead and say shading. Well, you know, I don't want these to be shaded across, so I'm going to group these separately also. We'll select those and we'll say shading. We'll use Fong with the assign adjacent off on those. And let's hide those. Similarly, I don't want this one shaded across. And so we'll do him all by himself. It really doesn't matter whether they're grouped or not, as long as you can select them easily. And we'll select the rest of them and say shading, and we'll go ahead and use the assign adjacent on. So the shading is set for the crab, and the front faces are not shaded, are not Fong shaded, and it's not really necessary. We're going to put a texture on the back face, and we'll use a wood grain for that and make it as though it's cut out of and extruded from a piece of wood. Okay, our crab is finished. Let's go ahead and do a fish. Let's jump into create a new space here, and we'll load our little fish bitmap that we had done in D-Paint. And once we've got him, we'll go ahead and do the same procedure we used to outline the crab. So I'm going to start right up here. We could start anywhere we wanted to. The attach point's up there. I'll grab a hold of that polygon and delete it, and begin my trace. Again, You don't have to worry very much at all about any sort of accuracy for most objects that you'll be doing in this way. You could, if you wanted to, of course, get your accuracy down to as far as a single pixel in the bitmap. And it helps to even pre-anti-alias these bitmaps using Art Department Pro or perhaps the blend function in dpaint so that the edges are nice and smooth. And I think that'll do it. We'll go ahead and toggle our trace mode to turn the fish back off. Grab a hold of the fish outline and extrude it just like we did on the crab. And we'll hide these front faces, the end caps, and back off a little bit. Let's go into isometric mode so that we can see clearly. Again, isometric mode just shows us all lines parallel in space or parallel on the screen. And we'll start to select our shading groups. Control and Shift key down. And I do want these to shade through here, and I similarly want these to shade through here. These I'd like to shade together, and let's go ahead and take the front of the top fin here and make him part of a shading group. Let's shade the eyes separately from the others, and we'll group those. Let's hide those, and let's take the top part of the fin, or back fin here, and this object here we don't want to shade across this angle here. Let's go ahead and grab these two. The rest of it looks like it'll be fine, so we'll go ahead and group those. Showing everything, hiding the front faces again so we only have the extruded shell. We'll select this group and say shading, falling on, accept, and hide. We'll select this group and say shading, falling on, accept, and hide. And the rest of them, and shading, falling on with the assign adjacent on, accept. And now we're ready to show everything. And all we have left to do is go ahead and take the faces. Now the shell is not selected, only the front and the back face, and say textures. We'll add another one. I better name this one so we can tell them apart here. Member control. We'll go ahead and select. We'll say show bitmaps load. Go ahead and get the fish, and just like on the other one, we'll project him along the Y at full strength and full color, matching so that it doesn't change over time. Projection on the Y. Everything looks like it's in good shape here. We'll accept that. And let's take a quick look at this. Turn our isometric off. Isometric does not work in the fill modes. If you wanted close to an isometric view, you could use your cursor right key, which will begin to flatten out. And what it's actually doing is moving the camera, the virtual camera, away from the object. Using the cursor left moves the camera closer, as you can see, increasing the perspective. So let's set it back to about right there. And take a quick look and make sure that we've done all right on our fish. And yeah, there he's sitting right there just like we'd hoped. Okay, let's go back to the editor here. And let's go to group level 2, select all and group. And then let's grab a hold of him, ask for the space control down to the displayed space of 1 and move him down. Jump back to space 1 and we have both our crab and our fish here in space. Let's flat view in the Y. We don't need to be in isometric so we can see a little more realistically what the view is. Move him across away from the crab a little bit. I want to select the crab here and his shell and group them too, since the fish is completely grouped. I'm setting the attach point at the origin. A right mouse button with a right mouse button click on this gadget. Right mouse button click on the multiple select. We'll select all. Right mouse button click here. We'll center everything to the origin. We now have 2 of our objects that will be in the mobile. Let's put a wooden spar across the top here. If I select the x-axis and say make an arc, default 360 at 12, if I rotate a little bit you'll see that it lays flat in the YZ plane, the x being selected being the odd man out. Let's go ahead and resize it. I'm using the shift key to resize in all dimensions at once. And we'll make the wooden bar about that big. Let's pull it up. And going back to the Y view, move it over this direction here about so. Now for our extrude defaults, let's ask for maybe 3 segments. We'll be extruding along the X, looks like maybe 40,000 units. Won't be a bad guess, and then we'll resize to what we want. In 3 segments with no power reduction or anything. We'll select this and extrude it across here. Obviously I was very wrong. I'm going to go ahead and group those select them. Let's go ahead and center them to the origin. The same procedure we've been using all along, which becomes very natural after a while and of course is very useful. We'll select this using the bottom as a straight edge. We'll stretch it out to about here. Looks pretty good. Let's look down from the X, go into isometric so I can judge that size a little better, and that looks fine. We'll go ahead and use that. Okay, back to the Y. We need some sort of a suspension here. Let's go ahead and use the Make a Rectangle tool and make a simple cube. It'll sit here in space. We're going to go ahead and resize this cube vertically just slightly. Looking down from the Z, then we'll select the cube and holding down the Alt key so both of these resize in the apparent dimensions the same. Make it about that big, like it's some sort of a little small wooden dowel. We'll use this as a suspension sitting between the objects and the main dowels. And let's go ahead and clone this object like so, and we'll grab it and we'll move it across to support the crab. Looks pretty good. Okay, we're in good shape. We can texture these if we want to. Let's go ahead and select them. I'm holding down the shift to be able to select the bar and these objects. And it occurs to me that I also want to apply a wood grain to the edges of this. I'll make this a wood grain and the extruded shell of the fish. So I think I'll wait until I've got all these cloned and apply them all at once. So now that we've got this object set up, let's set up some paths. We'll set our attach point at the center of this object and draw a triangle here. This triangle is going to rotate this beam plus these objects all at once. We'll also want these to free rotate, and I'm going to put a path, putting my attach point at the center of that. I'm going to draw a path here, like so. Of course, right now it's just a triangle. Let's go ahead and take this and make it a path. And we'll choose to rotate around the Z, which is the vertical dimension in Aladdin. And let's say that it starts at 0 and ends at 360. With an ease in of 1 and an ease out of 1, and that'll be on the first level. We'll add a second level, and since the first level, we'll make them even. First level went from 0 to 360. We want this to start at the same place, which will be 360, and we'll go back to 0 on it. And just so that it's not quite predictable as that, we'll change the beginning and entry time. We could go ahead and, if we had 30 frames in the animation as it's set up right now, we could select a frame here if we wanted to. Let's say we wanted it to change at frame 11. Or we could select the time. So let's accept that. That's 2 levels in that path, both rotations. And I'll tell you what, we'll go ahead and take this one and make it a path so that we're consistent here. And let's say we start at a -40 on this and end up, and it really doesn't matter. Let's go to 500 degrees. Well, not 5,000. It would spin too quickly to see. And let's use our ease in and ease out again. Let's go ahead and add a second level, even them out, and on this level we'll start at the 500 and we'll go ahead and go back to -40. We'll go ahead and select the first level and change it so that the time that it occurs is not as predictable as it could be if we kept it right at the center of the animation, and accept it. Let's go ahead and clone this path. We're going to set it over here, so I'll move my attach point to the center of this object, select one of those paths, and a right mouse button click here will snap it over. Now we're going to alter that path so that it's not the same as the other one. And let's say here that we start at 40 and go to, we'll make it rotate a little bit slower, let's say 440. And on the second level then we'll want to make sure that we start at 440 the same and go back to 40 so that they blend together well. I think we'll do this as a DCTV animation as an opcode 5 so that we can play it and watch it loop. So we have everything ready except for assigning our paths. Now this object plus this path and this path will be assigned to this path. And then this object and this object, the fish and his support will be assigned to this path here during the animation, and the crab and this object will be assigned to this path. Now what will happen is this crab and his support will look at this path and rotate, and then this path will look at this path and rotate the crab additionally by its instructions so that they'll stay. Let's preview the animation. This one might be good at about 180 frames, so let's set it at that and take a look. So we have everything working the way we wanted it to. It looks like it's going to be fairly nice. Might be a good idea to have a couple more levels to the mobile. So let's put those in real quickly. So we'll get out of here and back off on our view. This distance here is 10,000 units, so I'm estimating this distance here to be about 40 plus another 50, 60. So let's set our clone defaults to Z of negative 70,000. We can always grab our objects and move them if we want to. And to facilitate that, I'm going to go to group level 3, select all and group them. And so now we'll go ahead and select, which will select all because we just grouped them, and clone them. And there's our second level. Looks like our guess on distance was just about right. We'll make 3. And I'm going to set the attach point to the center, select all, and center them up. So now we've got 3 levels here. These paths, when they selected, the objects went ahead and grouped, and I don't want them all to be so predictable. So I'm going to select this path here and alter it a little bit. Well, we're going to need to be able to select it separately. So let's go back to group level 1 or 2, which we were working in. Select it. I'm using the keyboard shortcut Alt-P. And on this one, let's say that we have it move instead of 0 to 360, maybe 60 to 420. It won't rotate quite as much. We'll need to remember to change the top one and go just in the opposite direction, 420 to 60. And it looks like the other one I had forgotten to do that, so we'll want to double check these during the preview. So we'll accept that, and we'll do the same thing down here to this one, using the Alt-P to alter the path. We were at 0 to 360. Let's go minus 40 to 360. And go ahead and look at the second level. And we're at 360, and again, minus 40 here. Obviously, since these are clones, I did not have this one done. So let's make sure that on for 0 to 360, and 360 to 0. So that's why it didn't look like I had done anything. During the animation now, these will move at different rates. These, however, are still set up the same as these. So let's also alter these. Alt-P to alter this path. Let's go 40 to 400 on this one. And let's change our time. I'm going to go up here and move this down. And we're going 40 to 400 on it. These are, since it's a mobile, these are rather random changes. We'll alter this path. We won't even worry too much about changing our time. Instead, we'll just change the time that the event occurs, and that'll make it appear very random. On the second fish, we'll go ahead and we'll change this to maybe 80 and go to 550. It'll rotate a little faster, and here we'll go to 550 to 80, like so. And let's change just one more, and we'll go ahead and go from 40 to maybe 300. He'll be a rather slow one, and here we'll go from 300 to, I think we were at 40 on the other one. Let's make sure. Yeah, 40 to 300. And let's change our time on this a little bit and compress the top one so that it's not quite as predictable. One more thing I want to do, and that's change the time on this one a little bit. We could leave an opening in here, in which case the path would move it to that point, leave it in that position until the next member started, but we want these to be adjacent like so. So we're ready. I'm going to go to Quick Move and hit my F9 to preview what we've got going on here. It looks like our main paths are all starting and stopping at the same time, even though the rotation angles are different. So I want to change those a little bit. Going out of Quick Move, Alt-P, and we'll ask this one to change at that time. Selecting this one, Alt-P, and we'll go ahead and change it to here. Now we're in good shape. When we look, it'll look a little more random and natural. There we go. That looks pretty good. So we're all set except for the wood grain. Let's go ahead and go back to Quick Move. We're in group level 2. Let's see what, we had them all grouped. So let's go back to group level 1, where the outsides and the insides are all selected separately. I'm going to hide the faces of those two. And it looks like here we've got, when we did our clone, it's made the shell in front of the extruded faces. So I'm going to select a few of them and say move to last. Now I'll be able to select the faces if I grab an area that I had just moved to last. There's one. And say hide. And the same thing on the bottom, and it looks like here we're okay. We can just select and say hide. If I click a right mouse button here, it will invert the hidden and shown buffers. I'm going to select all of these, move to group level 4, and group them. Now I'm going to go back down to, or show everything here, and go ahead and select that group that I just made and hide them. What I have left here, besides the paths, are all of the objects, so let's select the paths. All of these objects that I'm not selecting are the ones that I want to put a wood grain on. And I accidentally select that twice, so let's move a point away so I can grab it easier. Let's move these. I just want to hide these paths. Okay, all of what's left, which is the bars, the supports, and the shells of the extrude, I want to go ahead and texture at the same time. So I'll say textures. I'll add one. When we did our clones, each one of these textures was cloned, which is exactly what you'd want in most instances. So we'll say control member control, let's select a new one, select a bitmap, and let's go to work. I believe I have one in textures called oak, which we'll use. There we go. This is a 24-bit oak texture that we used on a previous one. We'll select it and say use the suggested at full strength and full color, match so it doesn't change, and we'll use a free angle at, again, my favorite, 30 and minus 30, and accept. And now we have a wood grain on all of our shell and everything. Going to another group level where these are grouped separately. I believe in group level 1 I can select, let's select these objects here, just the, and let's shade these. We want them to be Phong shaded with adjacent on. The end caps being complex polys will not bridge, so we can go ahead and use that. This is a very useful thing. I'm rotating my view slightly. Very useful for fonts and so on. Okay, if we show all, bring back everything that we need. We won't use a path on this. Let's go ahead and do a test render. And make sure that everything's in good shape. Okay, we need to turn on our Phong. And we'll render it. There we go. Looks like we have everything right about where we want. We could, if we wanted to, here say redraw a frame and choose one, just to see what orientation they're going to be taking at that frame. And everything looks pretty good. This is, of course, just a 320 by 200. We'll render the actual animation at a better resolution. I want to do one more thing. I want to go ahead and add a background. Often when you're working in video, backgrounds will really help quite a bit. And let's name it background. And I think I'd like to use another bitmap. Bitmaps are a little faster than the procedurals. Let's go to work. In a drawer called pictures here. In deep, I've got a stone texture, a picture of slate sent to me by John Spoford of New England, which is quite nice. We'll use it. Suggested. It'll set the defaults. I'm going to use full color, and on the strength, I just want to barely cover anything in the background. All I really am doing is using the background to introduce a sort of noise. And with that strength, I can also, if I say render here, you can see that the background doesn't show because it's not selected. So not turned on. We'll go ahead and turn it on and redraw. I'm using black palette color at the moment. With the texture set at only a 24% strength, if I were to select my palette and let's say introduce a little bit of a blue color into it and say use and redraw, you'll see that it will color. In other words, 25% of the color information is coming from the bitmap. So let's go ahead and change that. I do like the blue a little bit, but not nearly so bright. And let's redraw, and that's nice. That's very nice. When we go to our final resolution, as a matter of fact, let's do that right now. Let's go ahead and change our display mode. We'll select standard, turn on these, which are the default for DCTV, then select DCTV and accept, and we'll change then at that point over to a DCTV mode. And we'll be able to see the image that's actually going to paint during the animation. I think it looks quite nice. One of the benefits of saving out DCTV, of course, is being able to play it back in real time on the Amiga instead of sending out single frame tapes. Also, I've set all of the paths up so that they will loop. So even though I'm saving out 180 frames, which is what, about 18 divided by 3, 6 seconds on video. Is that right? 18 divided by 3, yeah, 6 seconds. We'll be able to play it several times. So So we're all finished with this one. We'll go ahead and render it and put it on tape and show you what it looks like. Let's take a look at the gases in Aladdin. I've planned a space scene here. I've already loaded a background, which is a star scene. I'm going to flat view by hitting the space bar. And render options here. I've turned on the defaults we'll need. We'll be using light, fill, textures, foam, transparency for the gases, and the background. Setting screen mode, I'm using an Opal Vision low-res screen. I'll show you what the background looks like here real quickly. And so that's what we'll use for our background. This was sent to me by John Spofford. It's very nice. This is a gaseous object that was digitized from a photograph. It'll be interesting to compare it with what we can draw in Aladdin. Let's go back to the editor and add a gas here. It comes up in its defaults. The first gas I want to use will be just a very solid-looking central core of a sun. On it I want a strength that's very high, let's say about 20. And since we're going to use it as a core, and it's going to be just a spherical gas with no turbulence, we can use a very low number of samples per pixel. Samples per pixel controls how many times the gas is sampled inside its container. And the higher this number is, the longer it'll take to render, but the more photographic the effect. For a simple spherical gas that doesn't have anything intersecting with it, one will do fine. For a fall-off on it, from experience I know that the stronger the power is, the greater the fall-off should be in order to keep the edge somewhat gaseous looking. And we won't use any turbulence, so the turbulence color won't be necessary. We'll be getting our color and our density from the attribute list and from the top member of the gaseous container. Then we'll accept this and the gaseous container appears. We need to have it foam shaded. That's a requirement for gases. And for attributes, we'll add one. For control, we'll call it core so that we can recognize what it is. And member control, I want to have a nice yellow gas, bright yellow. The reflectivity, self-illumination, and so on make no difference whatsoever for gases. The transparency is very important, and I'll use a very low transparency of 1. We'll match so it doesn't change over time. I got that. And let's take a quick look here at what we've got. Now the gases do take a lot longer to render than any of the regular objects. However, they can be tolerable as long as you keep your samples per pixel down to a low level. So this is going to be the core of our sun. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some flames coming out away from the sun here, and we'll do that with a second gas. So let's go back to the editor here, and I'm going to take this one and hide it here for a second, and say gas add, and our second requester comes up for a second gas. This one I'm going to use even stronger setting because it's going to be the turbulence, and for samples per pixel, it'll require more samples. I'm going to use 6 for this. Because the turbulence, it's a 3D nature, and you can see through it, so we need to sample more often. On the fall off here, I'm going to use a value of 2. That will decrease the density at the edge very nicely. And for turbulence, maybe a setting of 80% of turbulence. For the scale, I'm used to using around a 0.8 at this default size, which works out very nice. And definition is how well defined the gaseous wisps are in the turbulence. And for that, we'll use about a 1.5 here. And now, our turbulence color, I want to be a very reddish color, so let's get rid of some of this green. We're using 255 on the red. The green will drop to 50, and we'll use no blue at all. This is additive density for the gases. We won't use any. And the noise samples, the higher this number is, the longer it'll take to render, but the smoother the turbulence becomes. It should be fine right there. Also, we're using a roll on this, and during the animation we'll use maybe 6 or 8 rolls of the turbulence. And so let's accept that. And again, we need to shade this. We'll use foam shading like so. And for attributes here, we'll add one and we'll call it flames. And for the member control, we'll want to use the color won't be too important here, although I'm going to use a yellow color. Most of this color is going to be ruled out. The turbulence at 80%, you'll see very little of this color. And for transparency, with the strength I've got set, I'm going to use a very high transparency so that it's not overwhelming. So we'll match on that and accept it. And now one of the things you'll notice as I render here is that turbulence requires far more time to render than just a regular spherical gas. However, it looks like we've got a nice looking flame there. Looks real good. If I let it render on down, of course I could, and we'd see a ball of flame. We might be able to see some open areas in the center. The second gas, when we overlay it, will fill in those areas, and we should have a very nice looking sun. Why don't we go ahead and go back and let's increase the size of this just slightly so that we can tell it apart from the other one. Then we'll show all this interior gas here, of course, was the core. And we'll render this. Now, because of the length of rendering time there, I'm going to go to my render options and set screen mode and go for a quarter screen here just for these test renders, 160 by 100 pixels. And so we'll render that. Now, that'll take 1/4 as long as the 320 by 200 would. And looks like we've got a pretty nice looking sun there. Yeah, I think I'll accept that. Let's do some kind of a planet to go around it here. We'll let it finish rendering so we can see a little bit more what it's going to look like. You know, that's very nice. Now, using 1 sample per pixel on the central core of the sun means that the gas has been sampled in between the wisps. So we have some wisps here that are sticking, protruding far in front of it, and when this rotates and animates during the animation, that ought to look very nice. So let's go back to the editor here and think about a planet. We'll go ahead and back off a little bit here and select everything and hide it. And for the planet, we'll be getting very close to it during the animation, so I want to make it a well-defined sphere. Let's use 180 degrees in our arc and maybe 16 segments in the initial arc here. We'll put the attach point at the top, select the Z because that's what we want to rotate around, get our sweep defaults up and use 360 at about 32 segments. Connect last off. Again, the last segment is this long one the way the arc is made, and we don't want that to participate in the sweep. So we'll accept that and sweep this, and here we'll have our planet. Now if I'm going to want to be very careful about this, I would select this and change these all to triangles. Rectangles are flat, however they're not perfectly flat because of the nature of a sweep. If we converted it to triangles, of course a 3-pointer polygon is perfectly flat and would render as clean as possible. But we'll go ahead and leave this the way it is. We'll go ahead and foam shade it here. And we want to make sure we set an attribute list on it. We'll add one for the control. We want to make sure we name it so we can tell it apart. And member control. The one thing I'm not going to really be using much here in the way of reflectivity because I'm going to use illumination maps on this, but I want to make sure there's no hardness on this object so we get no highlights. I'll probably turn off the global lights anyhow so it won't matter, but making sure that way. Let's put a texture map on it right now while we're here. So we'll, the first thing we want to do is resize it smaller because you saw how large the sun was. This planet is as large as the sun. We want it to be fairly small. So we'll make it about so big, move it off to the side here, and like so, we'll go ahead and page move over so we can see. The sun sits clear out to about here, so we might want to even move it out further. After we take a look at the renders, we'll be able to position it a little bit better here. I was working in the Z-axis. If I go flat view, you'll see I've moved it slightly off center. So I'm going to set my attach point at the origin with a right mouse button click here, grab the planet, and a right mouse button click here will center it again. I'm going to select it and use the bottom as a straight edge to pull it straight out this time. That's better. I'll be putting a path that's centered that will track around. So let's go back to the Y-axis now and page move over here. Zoom in on it a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. I'm using the cursor down key to move in, holding down the shift and the cursor left to page move across here just like so and centering it up. And let's think about our textures here. I want to go ahead and add one. For the control, we'll call it planet so we can tell it apart from the background, which are the only two textures we'll use here. Remember control, I'm going to use a procedural noise texture. The closed will be fine. If I hit suggested here, it comes up with a 5,000, which is far too large for what I want. I want about 200 on this. And what I'm going to do is we'll go ahead and we'll use full color and only a partial strength on this. And we want it to be an illumination map. So we go to illumination. On procedural colors, I'm going to use only two colors, even all the way across. For the black color, that means there'll be no light coming from this part of the map. And the second one, we'll go ahead and use a very strong red here, just like so. That's not even red enough. There we go. And then what I want to have, I want it to look like there is a molten layer under the crust of the planet. We'll leave the blends at their default and so on. Hit the match and accept this like so. And we'll be using full color off of the illumination map, and like I said, about half strength. So we'll hit match on that, make sure they stay the same. And one more thing I want to do here. If I leave this with the current attach point for the procedural center, we'll see the noise mirror around the center. So I'm going to move this off about 100,000 units in space in all three directions. That way the planet will be existing in one quadrant and we'll see no mirroring. Why don't we go ahead and render this real quickly and just take a look. Oh yeah, that's going to be very nice. I want to go ahead and turn off my global lights. There we go, so we don't have those. And since we're away from the gases, I'm going to go back to a standard. When I hit standard, that changed. Go back to opal, and we'll be able to see this planet a little bit better. And yeah, that looks like it's pretty good. It could be we could turn the strength up a little more so it had a little more of a glow to it. As a matter of fact, that might be a good idea because the sun's going to really compete with it. I don't need to select the planet because I'm not going to add any members here or anything. So we'll turn up the strength a little bit, just like so, and say match on it, and take another quick look here. And yeah, that looks a little bit better. Now, even though this may look like that's also transparency, that is an opaque surface in here. This red area has been added, and light has been added at the same time since it's an illumination map. So we'll go back to the editor here. And I want to make a gaseous shroud around the planet. Let's back off because the gas is going to appear at the origin. Then we'll say gas add. And it's going to come up, I'm going to use a fairly strong gas, about a 10 here, with only one sample per pixel, which ought to alert you that I'm going to use no turbulence. And for a fall off here, we'll use a 2, which seems to work very well. And turbulence color and so on isn't going to matter, so we'll accept that. The gas appears. I'm going to select this. While it's selected, if I use a right mouse button here, it sets the attach point to the center. Selecting this, I center it up to the planet. And now I'm going to go ahead and holding down my shift key, resize this down so that it can just form a little shroud around this planet, just like so. The gas, since I defined it spherical, exists inside this cubical container. And so let's take a look at it and see how well I've done here on my guesses on strength and so on. And this is what a gas looks like if you don't foam shade it and set a transparency for it. So we'll set our shading on, and we'll go ahead and set attributes. We'll add, and we might call this atmosphere or shroud will be fine. On member control, let's go ahead and assume that the sun is going to be illuminating it and use a fairly yellow and not too transparent at all. We can go ahead and control the strength of the gas instead. So let's render it and see what we've got here. And looks like I need to make it considerably larger or stronger. Can't really see it at all. So let's go back to the editor here. And we'll do both. We'll go ahead and we'll increase its size a little bit. And selecting it, we'll say gas alter. And we'll increase its strength to a 20 here. And see what it looks like at that. And let's render it. Being able to quickly get feedback off of, now I may have overdone it at this point. Of course, that's far too much glow for it. But it does look very nice. Maybe we'll leave it. I can go ahead and do two things. I can decrease the strength, or I can increase the transparency of the gas, or I can increase the fall-off factor to bring this in tighter to the planet's surface. Let's go ahead and just take a simple approach and decrease the strength of it just slightly here. We'll use maybe a 16 or a 17 on it, and that ought to be about right. So we're in good shape. We've got our planet defined well. We've got our sun all set up here. Let's go ahead and center our view and back off on it here so we can see both at once. And it's going to be very nice. I'll set an attach point at the center by clicking here with nothing selected. The attach point moves to the center so that I can draw a triangle here. This triangle, I'm going to make a path, and what we're going to do is ask it to rotate 360 degrees around the center. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Select that, set the attach point to its center, and draw a little triangle off of it. This I'm going to say make poly a path, and we'll make it run 360 degrees around the Z also. But I can use, again, the local cycles here in this rotation member, or I can use a global. I'll go ahead and use the local. I want it to rotate about 5 times during the animation. Ought to be nice. And now we want to assign this planet and this gas to this path, and then we want to assign this path, since they can be hierarchically linked, to this second path here. Hitting the Q key to go to quick move and the F9, and we see the type of motion. I'm using the 7 key to rotate a little bit so we can see what's going around that. And of course that's not nearly enough frames. Let's ask to go about 8 seconds here on this one, and we'll take another look here. Well, I don't think we want to go out of 2400 frames. And hitting the Q key again so we can see it. We can see that it's going to rotate as it goes around here, and that looks very nice. If I go ahead and hide the planet, the preview will be able to function considerably faster without the preview on. Hitting the F9 again, you can see what's going to happen. Now, I think I'd also like the sun to rotate as the gas rolls in the noise turbulence. Will make it rotate. So we'll add another path here. I can select that. That's already at the center. I'll draw another path up here, just a little triangle's convenient handle. The rotation occurs around the first point in the path, which is at the origin. And we'll say to make that a path. And again, we'll go 360 on this. As a matter of fact, during the animation, we'll only have it turn maybe 180 degrees so that it won't be staying synchronous with the planet. And we'll accept that. And we'll take both. Actually, we only need to assign one, but we'll go ahead and assign both of these to this path here. During the animation, then, if I hit the F9, you'll see what type of rotation we've got going on. So we're in good shape. We could go ahead and render it this way. Might be a little more dramatic, though, if we use a camera system. Let's set the camera target at the origin. I set the attach point at the origin, so that's where it'll appear. The camera always appears out away from the gas. Looking down from the origin, looking down from the Z here. I think what I'll do is I'm holding down my Alt key. I've selected the camera. I'm moving it out like this. Now, cameras cannot enter gases, so we want to make very careful that we don't have the camera enter the gas at any time. And let's do some movement here. I'm going to select the target, move it out away from there. We'll go have it looking between the gas and the planet at first. I'm going to draw a line here so that the target's going to move like so. We'll make this a path, and all we'll do is turn on the motion for that particular one. We'll select the target and assign it to this one. We'll do the same thing for the camera here. We'll draw a path out away from it like so, and the sun's going to be rotating in this direction, so if I make it go that direction, it's going to almost cancel out the rotation. We'll have to look at that as we do it here. Also want to make sure that this gas that surrounds this planet doesn't go through the camera during the animation. We'll go ahead and select this and say make poly a path, turn on movement like so, and then select the camera and tell it that during the animation it should look at this path. Now, our editor view here that we're looking at, I'm using the 9 key to rotate and the 1 key to rotate here around the Z, looking at it from a different angle. I'm going to hit my F9 key and watch what happens here. When we're working with the editor, then we work with a camera. Oh, that'll be nice when well, it might be a little bit too much when that goes through there. The editor view is not going to be nearly as important. I don't want the planet to move so fast, so I'm holding down the Alt and hitting the P to alter this path. I'm going to ask it to only rotate 180 degrees. We'll accept that. And for the sun, I'm going to alter it and increase its rotation to 360 so the camera doesn't quite modify it so much. Hitting the F9 key again, the planet will stay in view considerably longer. It's going to get much too close there, so we'll want to make sure that we take care of that. That'll be a nice rotation around the sun, and it'll move to the side as the planet re-enters. Let's go back to the Z, and I'm going to have the camera move along more away from the planet here. Let's see what kind of result we got there. Looks like we better move its start position because that's quite close. Okay, well, it might look very good. Let's accept it, and we'll go ahead and take a look at a couple of frames here. Let's ask to render. Of course, it's going to render the first frame, and at the 320 by 200 resolution here, it's going to take a while to render all the gases and so on. We'll let it continue just so you can get a feel for it. During the animation render, I'll probably go ahead and use a 368 by 480 resolution instead of going to the full 736 that I normally use. That way, it'll render almost twice as fast. And with gases, the beauty of them is that you don't need to increase your resolution to see some of the finer details. They are anti-aliased by default and look quite good. And looks like that the gas I have around the planet is still quite a bit too strong here. I think, that's right, the planet's hidden, and that's why we're only seeing the gaseous shroud around the planet. So, looks real good. We'll go ahead and stop it here, and I'm going to render the animation, and we'll show you when it's finished.